Everybody has an origin, even super secret Russian assassins. Even though Natasha Romanoff would probably want to do her specialty leg wrap flip to me for talking about her past, I think she has one of the most interesting backstories out of any Avenger.
You still think you're the only monster on the team?
What exactly is Black Widow's origin story? How did she become the hero we know her as? Well, join us on the latest episode of CBR Origins to discover every secret detail and major event in Natasha's life.
You're an actress, buddy. Is she a spy too? They start that young?
I did.
Let's get started right now. She used to have nothing. That's how Black Widow described her past as Steve Rogers in Endgame. She used to have nothing, but then she got this job and this family and she became better because of it. That little speech in Endgame may not have been the most memorable moment in that movie, because let's face it, how is a somber monologue about a sad person ever going to compete with things like Steve Rogers wielding Mjolnir, am I right? But it's a beautiful character moment for Natasha that only adds to the tragedy of what happens later in the movie with her death. Because come on, you probably thought she was safe, right? I mean, we all went into Endgame knowing there was a Black Widow movie coming next, so out of any hero, she seemed the safest. Well, we all know how that turned out. But let's turn back the clocks a bit and talk about that nothing she referred to. Yes, that's right. It's time for Black Widow's origins. Out of all the Avengers, I think it's pretty clear that Natasha has the most complicated past out of any of the original heroes. Sure, both Tony and Thor had to undergo some pretty extreme character development to shed their arrogant personalities to become selfless heroes, but that's really nothing compared to what Natasha had to do as she transitioned from one of the deadliest assassins in the world to one of the biggest heroes. Natasha Romanoff was born in 1984, and at a very young age, she was recruited by the KGB. From there, she was enrolled in the Red Room Academy, which might be the single worst man-made program in the entire MCU. Their mission was to basically train child assassins.
You'll break them. Only the breakable ones.
Hey, you know how children are impressionable and it's easier for them to learn things at young ages than it is as an adult? Well, I think that should only apply to things like learning a second language or something.
What happened to your accent?
What happened to yours?
Yeah, knowing how to snap a neck in 6 different ways before you hit puberty? That should happen later in life. Like maybe after you're allowed to buy a ticket to an R-rated movie by yourself? But that's just my opinion. Anyways, Natasha excelled with her Red Room training and basically became their top student. She probably got a lot of gold stars and A+ over her time there. Though of course in the Red Room a gold star probably meant a new shiny bullet or a brand new switchblade. Although the Red Room wanted to strip her of all her humanity and make her nothing but a killing machine loyal to Mother Russia, there was still good in Natasha. A really defining moment in her young life was when she was forced to execute an innocent man for training purposes. She did so, but it was an act that haunted her for the rest of her life. So a lot of this information comes from Avengers: Age of Ultron, and while that movie has its fair share of criticism levied against it, it's interesting to see how much backstory we got from Natasha, because we learned a truly horrific detail about the Red Room's graduation ceremony. As a reward for completing the program and being able to go out into the world and start full-time assassinating, Natasha was sterilized as a way to stop her from being distracted in life so that she could focus solely on her mission. Now this was a much discussed plot point when it was first revealed. The fact that she couldn't have kids made Natasha feel like a monster, which is why she felt so connected with Bruce.
Now go be a hero.
But of course afterwards, there are plenty of vocal fans who saw this plot point as problematic because it seemed to be saying that people who couldn't have children were damaged in some way. But really the point of this scene and plot point is how it made Natasha feel. After she was sterilized, Natasha felt even more alone than she already did. Maybe to her, all she could do to feel a sense of family was check out the latest Fast and Furious movie. So she continued on this path, becoming the much-feared Black Widow. And she probably would have either continued on this path and stayed the world's deadliest assassin, or would have wound up dead at some point. But then a fellow by the name of Clint Barton came along and changed everything. So while Black Widow was making a name for herself in a bad way, and in her words, putting so much red in her ledger, her actions caught the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D. They wanted to take her out, and not for a pizza party if you catch my drift. So they sent one of their top agents after her to eliminate her. This, of course, is Hawkeye. Man, I know we're doing a Black Widow origin story right now, but I also wish we knew more about Hawkeye's backstory. Like, when he was working for S.H.I.E.L.D. as their own assassin and top agent, did he still use the bow and arrow? Did Clint enter S.H.I.E.L.D. with the ability to use the bow and arrow, or did he learn it on the job? So many questions. Anyways, Clint was sent to kill Natasha, and it's one of those events that I really wish we could see in the MCU. Is it too much to ask for the Black Widow movie to open on this milestone? Or heck, maybe we could even see it in the Hawkeye TV show. Anyways, however this epic fight went down, we know the outcome. Hawkeye gained the upper hand and had a chance to kill Natasha, only he didn't. As Natasha says it, he made a different call. Clint saw something in Natasha and convinced Nick Fury that she could be turned and brought over to their side. Well, the gamble worked, and Natasha officially switched sides and joined S.H.I.E.L.D. She then developed a strong bond with Hawkeye. They went on a number of high-profile missions together, including the still super mysterious Budapest mission, which honestly I hope they never show.
Just like Budapest all over again!
You and I remember Budapest very differently.
It was this first relationship with Clint that really opened the door for family and friends that Natasha previously thought was closed forever. So now, Natasha was a full-blown S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Woohoo! Even though there were quite a few pair-ups with Clint, she also had her share of solo missions where she continued to do relatively good work of saving people. Sure, S.H.I.E.L.D. has always been a little shady, and I'm sure there were a few gray areas in there sometimes, but overall, she was on the side of the heroes. Thanks to Captain America, the Winter Soldier, we know that she crossed paths once with Bucky Barnes. One time, she was protecting a nuclear scientist and escorting him out of Iran, but Bucky, as the Winter Soldier, caught up to them. Natasha was wounded as Bucky shot through her stomach in order to kill the scientist, so that was probably one of the only missions Natasha ultimately failed. Bummer. But now we're getting into Avengers territory, and looking at where we actually first saw Natasha on screen and where she ended up, her journey's quite amazing. Nick Fury was still a little put off by Tony Stark and his amazing technology / free spirit, so he sent Natasha undercover to spy on him. She was there to further assess whether Tony was right for the Avengers initiative. On her first introduction, we learned that not only was she fluent in French, Italian, Russian, and Latin, but she could also kick Happy Hogan's butt without breaking a sweat. After this display, Tony hired her as his personal assistant. Like, Black Widow can be a master manipulator when she wants to be, but this had to be the easiest infiltration she's ever done. Something we didn't see in any of the movies, but was revealed in comics later, was that Black Widow played a significant part in the Incredible Hulk storyline. She was there to witness Hulk and Emil Blonsky's fistfight, and later encountered Samuel Stearns post-mutation. You remember how Stearns was left as a big cliffhanger in the Incredible Hulk? Well, shortly after he was infected and his brain power increased, Black Widow entered the room, where Stearns was able to identify Natasha's birthplace just by the tiny hint of an accent in her voice. Natasha responded by shooting Stearns in the leg and taking him into custody. Sounds about right. But this vigilance explains a little better why Natasha was chosen to go handle the big guy at the beginning of the Avengers.
I've got Stark. You get the big guy.
Now, I've always found this whole sequence of events interesting in both how Black Widow and Hawkeye ended up joining the Avengers. Like, they weren't on the list originally, right? Clint just so happened to be in the room guarding the Tesseract when Loki arrived and brainwashed him, while Natasha seemingly only wanted to get truly involved once she knew Clint was compromised and wanted to save him. And then they both just kinda stuck around. Not that I'm really complaining, I just find it interesting, that's all. But I mean, after the whole Battle of New York, it was clear that Natasha was a full-fledged Avenger. But of course, the Avengers could only team up after a few years of solo missions, so what was next for Natasha? Well, it was mainly forming a really tight bond with Steve Rogers. She was basically his S.H.I.E.L.D. partner, and the two ran a lot of missions together, though she still wasn't telling Steve everything. Without Steve knowing, Natasha had her own set of orders, and when Steve's strike team was sent to rescue the hostages on the Lemurian Star during the events of Captain America the Winter Soldier. This whole movie was a tense political thriller where you never quite knew who you could trust, and the notoriously hard-to-read Natasha was a perfect addition to this cast, as you never doubted that she was a good guy. But you had your doubts on whether she was telling the whole truth.
You just jeopardized this whole operation.
I think that's overstating things.
I already mentioned the flashback arc in Age of Ultron where we learned about her past, so let's skip that and focus on Captain America Civil War. I know what everyone loves about the movie is Captain America and Iron Man fighting each other, but I think Natasha's arc often gets overlooked. For the most part, everyone knew what side they were on from the beginning. They either wanted to sign the Sokovia Accords or they didn't. But Natasha seemed conflicted on whose side to truly follow. She went back and forth between Tony and Steve, but really for her it wasn't about the Sokovia Accords, it was about keeping her one and only family together. After Civil War is still uncharted territory that will be answered in the Black Widow movie. But we know that after Civil War she returns home, and sometime after presumably stopping Taskmaster, she decides to meet back up with Steve and his team. It looks like after Civil War she was a little burned on the notion of a family and a team. But the lessons she'll learn in Black Widow will bring her back to her Avenger family.
My plan was to drive us away.
And then she gets an awesome new blonde haircut, and she gets to hang out with nomad Steve Rogers. I can only imagine the awesome missions this anti-Avengers team got up to in the few years leading up to Infinity War. I don't know when we'll ever fill in that gap, but I'm hoping we do someday. But that brings us to the beginning of her end. When Thanos comes knocking, the Avengers reunite and everyone tries their best to stop him from snapping his fingers. Of course, that doesn't work, and Infinity War ends with Thanos triumphant and huge dust piles appearing everywhere. Black Widow was one of the lucky half to stick around. But were they really that lucky? The world seemed miserable and the remaining survivors tried their best to keep going in the face of utter failure. After the blip, there was a small flicker of hope. Almost a month after everything went down, the remaining Avengers found out where Thanos was and decided to go pay him a friendly visit.
We owe it to everyone who's not in this room to try.
They just wanted to knock on his door, maybe share a drink with him, and then beat him senseless and steal the Infinity Stones to reverse everything. I can only imagine the mixture of grief and hope everyone was feeling in this mission. Stakes were very high. Of course, it didn't matter. The stones were destroyed, and though they ended Thanos' life with a clean decapitation, no one felt like they had really won. Cue the title card. 5 years later. Almost all the characters were in tremendously different phases of grief 5 years in the future. Tony had basically moved on with Pepper and had a child who he loved 3000. Banner worked out his issues with Hulk to become Professor Hulk.
I'm so confused. These are confusing times.
Thor spiraled into depression and gave up. Steve was trying to push through and help the remaining survivors move on with different support groups, but really a ton of kudos goes to Natasha. Again, I don't think she gets enough credit in this period of time because she effectively is keeping the team together at this point. She's leading the new Avengers who not only are protecting Earth, but have an eye over the entire galaxy. These Avengers consist of Carol Danvers, Rocket Raccoon, War Machine, and Okoye. That's seriously impressive. She's leading the first galaxy-wide coalition of Avengers because no one else would. That's when we come full circle to what was discussed at the beginning. She says she had nothing in her life before she became an Avenger and doesn't want to see it fall apart. The Avengers are her one true family.
This job. This family.
Again, this makes what happens next all the more tragic. Because while Natasha is trying to keep everything together, her best friend Clint is descending deeper and deeper into the dark side. After losing his entire family, Hawkeye officially becomes Ronin and travels the world murdering bad guys. See, this is interesting because it's basically a reversal of the situation Natasha and Clint were in at the beginning of their relationship. But this time, Clint is on the dark path, and Natasha has to decide to keep fighting for him and bring him back to the side of good. She does that with the notion of suggesting there's a way to bring everyone back, which leads to their ultimately final mission together. Now sure, story-wise, it really had to be these two to go to Vormir and get the Soul Stone, but for one, we were lucky it was them and not like Rocket and Thor because what would they have sacrificed then?
I'll be right back, okay? There's the wine cellar. It's just down here. My father used to have this huge barrel of Iconian ale.
And also you're sending two regular humans who have never been in outer space or on another planet before alone to Vormir to get the stone? Whose idea was that? But the audience must have been awkwardly staring at each other the entire time as they traveled there because we all knew what was about to happen. But I'll say, Black Widow's death was truly a big surprise. The whole situation sounded like the perfect Hawkeye send-off. It's well known that Jeremy Renner wanted Hawkeye to die after the Avengers, and it definitely seemed like the character was getting ready to bite the dust in Avengers Age of Ultron. Plus, him dying in order to save Natasha and his family felt like the type of noble thing he would want. And again, Black Widow had a movie in the works. But of course, that's not how things went. After a fight to see who could fling themselves off the cliff first, it was actually Natasha who sacrificed herself so Clint could live. Now that moment itself is tragic, but if you look at everything I've talked about today, it's a near perfect character arc. Sure, Tony's sacrifice gets all the credit in Endgame, but don't forget about Natasha. She was an empty vessel of an assassin who was rescued out of the darkness by a person who saw good in her and set her on a path to have a makeshift family when she couldn't have one herself. Then she is eventually able to sacrifice herself so that the person she cares for most has a chance to be reunited with his family. It's beautiful. So that was Black Widow's origins from start to finish, and I hope laying it all out like this gives you a better picture of everything that Natasha went through. And is her story truly over? I don't know. It's the MCU. Really anything can happen. And if Black Widow ends up making an extraordinary amount of money, you can imagine Disney's pushing Marvel to somehow continue the Black Widow story. Okay, every character in Marvel history seems to be getting a Disney Plus spin-off show, so why not Black Widow? Like, Loki got one even though he's dead, so why couldn't Black Widow? Heck, I'd even watch a show about her ghost pestering Red Skull for all eternity. Make it happen, Disney Plus.